I never thought I'd be the guy telling a story about my straight roommate suddenly deciding to start sleeping undressed and then, well, crawling into my bed one night. Honestly, if you told me that last part 6 months ago, I would have laughed in your face. But here I am, trying to make sense of it all. So, let me back up a bit. I'm Ben. I live in a pretty average 2-bedroom apartment in the city, sharing it with my roommate, Jake. Jake's your classic guy's guy, into sports, beers with the boys, and always talking about the hot girl. He's definitely not going to ask out. When we moved in together, it was just supposed to be a convenient arrangement, nothing complicated. We split rent, shared a couch, and gave each other space. That's the whole story, right? Well, no, Jake's always been, as far as I knew, solidly straight. I mean, he's dated quite a few women, and he talks about them like he's actually interested. Sometimes I wondered if he exaggerated a little to sound cooler, but whatever. That part didn't matter much to me. Roommates are roommates. You don't really dig deeper than that. But then, a couple of weeks ago, something weird started happening. Jake suddenly stopped wearing pajamas to bed, at all. I thought he was just pulling some new man cave kind of thing. You know? But no, he was literally sleeping completely undressed. Not just in his room either. Sometimes I'd catch him in the kitchen in the middle of the night, in nothing but a big hoodie, which I guess was a bit ironic. I didn't even know what to say. I bring it up once, jokingly, and he just shrugged, like it's more comfortable. Fair enough. I mean, we all have our quirks, and I didn't want to make a big deal of it. But it was weird, not gonna lie. Especially since we've shared a bathroom, and sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of him just hanging out in the living room without a stitch on. It was casual for him, but definitely made me a little uncomfortable at first. The thing is, Jake and I weren't exactly close before this. We'd chat, sure, but mostly about the usual. Work, the latest sports scores, who's up for going out on the weekend. Nothing personal, nothing that made me think, maybe there's something more here. I'd been quietly crushing on him for a long time, sure, but I kept it to myself because, well, who would want to mess up a roommate situation? Especially with a guy like Jake, who seemed so straight and confident. Then, last Thursday night, things took a turn that I still can't fully wrap my head around. I was up late working on some deadline, headphones on, trying not to notice the quiet sounds from Jake's room. Around 2 a.m., the door creaked open. I thought maybe he was grabbing a glass of water, but then I felt the bed shift beside me, and before I could even process what was happening, Jake was crawling into my bed. Undressed, no warning, no explanation, just him, sliding under the covers, like he belonged there. I froze, heart pounding, like I was about to fail a test I didn't even know I was taking. He didn't say a word, just looked over with this weird, vulnerable smile that didn't fit the guy the first thought I knew. At that moment, the entire dynamic between us changed. I wanted to say something, anything, but my mouth was dry and my mind was spinning. Was this some drunken mistake? A dare? Or was it something else? Something I never saw coming? I've been replaying that night over and over, trying to figure out what it means, what I should do, and what Jake might be feeling. Because, honestly, I'm not sure he even knows himself yet. So yeah, that's where I'm at. My straight roommate started sleeping undressed, and then one night, he just crawled into my bed. And now, I don't know if I'm about to lose the best roommate I ever had or maybe gain something I never expected. It was the kind of silence that screams louder than words. We just lay there for what felt like forever. Neither of us moved, neither of us spoke. I could hear my own heart hammering in my ears, and I was pretty sure Jake could hear it too. The warmth from his body next to mine was confusing. I mean, I'd imagined what it would be like to be close to him like this, but now that it was actually happening, it felt a million times more intense and fragile than I expected. Finally, I managed to clear my throat. Jake, what? He cut me off with a soft shake of his head, like he was trying to say, "Don't make this weird." Then he glanced at me, eyes a little wider than usual, and said quietly, "I don't know what this is either." That answer, or maybe the lack of one, was somehow more honest than anything I'd heard from him before. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a dare. It was just real, raw, and messy. We didn't sleep much that night. Mostly, we just lay there, awkwardly close, sharing the same space but not quite touching. I kept stealing little glances at him, at the way his chest rose and fell, the faint stubble on his jaw, the way his hand twitched slightly on the blanket. Eventually, I asked, "Are you okay?" It felt like the safest question I could ask without pushing too hard. Jake hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think so. Just a lot going on, I guess." That was it. That was all I got. The next morning was even more awkward. Neither of us mentioned the night, but the air between us was different. Less tense in some ways, but heavier in others. I was afraid to bring it up, worried I'd break whatever fragile truce we'd formed. Over breakfast, Jake was his usual self, making dumb jokes, pretending like nothing had changed. But I caught him looking over at me more often than before, and there was something in his eyes that made me think he was wrestling with the same confusion I was. Days passed, and Jake kept up his new habit of sleeping undressed. I started to notice little things. A brush of skin as he passed by, the way his body was so relaxed at home, like he was shedding some kind of armor. He was quieter, less aggressive in the way he teased me, almost softer. One night, maybe 3 or 4 days after he'd crawled into my bed, I was sitting on the couch watching TV when Jake came out of his room in nothing but his hoodie again. He paused when he saw me looking and gave me a small, shy smile. "Hey," he said, like it was the most normal greeting in the world. "Hey," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He settled into the seat next to me, close but not touching. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Can I ask you something kind of weird?" I nodded, heart picking up speed. "Have you ever thought about, I don't know, maybe liking someone you didn't expect?" It was such a vague question, but the way he said it made it feel so heavy, like he was tiptoeing around something big. "Yeah," I said softly, more than once. He laughed nervously. "Yeah, me too. But usually it's people I actually know, not random crushes." There was a pause, then he looked right at me, eyes searching. "Have you ever thought about me?" I swallowed hard, trying to keep my face from betraying everything I was feeling. "Yeah, I have. More than I probably should." Jake's mouth twitched into a small smile. "Good to know I'm not crazy." That moment felt like a bridge, an unspoken acknowledgement that we were both leaning into something uncertain, something new. After that night, things started to change between us. Jake began opening up more, telling me about his days, his fears, stuff he never mentioned before because maybe he thought I wouldn't understand. And I listened, really listened, without any judgment. One evening, we cooked dinner together, something we hadn't done since we moved in. We laughed over burnt garlic bread and argued about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. It felt easy, natural, like maybe this whole roommate thing was turning into something better. But I still had questions. Was Jake experimenting? Was he confused? Was this just a phase, or was it something deeper? One night, a couple weeks after that first night in bed, I found him sitting on the balcony, staring out at the city lights. I joined him, and we sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then he finally said, "You know, I've always thought I was straight. Like, completely. But lately, I don't know. Maybe it's not that simple." I didn't say anything at first. Instead, I reached out, took his hand quietly. His fingers twined with mine naturally, like they'd been waiting to do that for a long time. "I'm here," I said. "Whatever you figure out, I'm not going anywhere." He squeezed my hand, and for the first time, I saw the vulnerability behind his confident mask. That night, when he came over to my bed again, it wasn't just confusion or accident. It felt like a choice, and for the first time, I was ready to take the risk too. That night, when Jake slid into bed beside me again, it felt different. There wasn't the same awkwardness or hesitation as before. Instead, there was this quiet understanding floating between us, like we were both holding our breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I could feel the warmth of his body beneath the sheets, close enough that I could count the freckles scattered across his shoulder. It was oddly comforting, and yet my mind was spinning in a dozen directions all at once. Was this the start of something real, or just a moment we'd both forget tomorrow? Jake shifted and looked over at me, his eyes reflecting the dim light from my bedside lamp. "I'm scared," he said quietly. "Yeah? Me too," I admitted. He smiled, a little shaky but genuine. "I don't even know what I want right now, but I don't want to lose you either." That hit me harder than I expected. I'd been so focused on my own feelings, on what I wanted or hoped for, that I hadn't stopped to think about what Jake was going through. This was probably just as scary for him as it was thrilling for me. "Whatever this is," I said softly, "we figure it out together. No rush, no pressure." He nodded, relief washing over his face. We ended up just lying there, talking in low voices about everything and nothing. The usual defenses we'd had around each other melted away, replaced by this fragile honesty. It was one of those rare nights where silence felt safe, not awkward. The next morning, things didn't feel weird. We weren't jumping into anything dramatic or intense overnight, but there was a shift, a new kind of closeness. That day, Jake actually lingered by the door before heading out to work, like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. Finally, he turned back around and said, "Thanks for listening. For not freaking out." I shrugged, grinning. "Hey, you're my roommate, and maybe something more someday. I'm not about to freak out." He laughed, and that made my chest tighten for reasons I couldn't quite explain. Over the following weeks, we settled into a strange new rhythm. Jake was more relaxed around me, less guarded. We spent more evenings together, watching movies, grabbing late-night snacks, sometimes just talking about life. And those nights, when he came into my bed, they became less of a secret and more of a quiet routine. One night, after a long day at work had left me drained, Jake surprised me by cooking dinner. He was terrible at it, but he tried. We laughed through the burnt edges and soggy pasta, and for the first time, I felt like we were more than just roommates sharing space. After dinner, we ended up on the couch, the glow from the TV flickering across his face. I could see the hesitation behind his eyes, like he was trying to figure out how far to push things. "Do you ever think about labels?" he asked suddenly. "Sometimes," I said. "But honestly, I'm more into just us, whatever that means." He nodded, staring down at his hands. "Yeah, me too. I just don't want to mess this up." "You won't," I said, reaching over to bump his shoulder playfully. "We're figuring it out together. No pressure." That seemed to ease him a little. We sat there in that comfortable silence for a bit, before he shifted closer, his arm brushing against mine. It was a small touch, but it sent a jolt through me. I turned toward him slowly, watching his face for any sign that he wanted to pull back. Instead, he gave a tiny smile and leaned in. Our lips met, tentative at first, like testing the waters. But then the kiss deepened, and all the confusion, fear, and unanswered questions melted away. It was just us, two guys discovering something new. After that night, the line between roommate and something else blurred. We didn't go out and announce we were together or anything. That felt too soon. But every day, every look, every touch made it clearer that we were moving forward. Of course, it wasn't always easy. Jake still wrestled with what this meant for him, and I tried not to push too hard. There were moments when he'd pull back, unsure, and I'd have to remind myself to be patient. One afternoon, a few weeks later, we were hanging out after work when Jake suddenly said, "I told my sister about us." I choked on my drink. "Wait, you told your sister? Like, you're dating me?" He shrugged, a little sheepish. "I guess. She's cool about it, surprisingly. Said I should just be honest with myself." That felt like a huge step. If his sister knew, maybe Jake was starting to accept this part of himself too. I smiled, reaching for his hand. "I'm glad you told her." He squeezed my hand back. "Yeah, me too." Living with Jake had always been easy. Living with Jake like this, open, vulnerable, and real, was something else entirely. But for the first time, I was okay with the uncertainty. Because whatever happened next, we were in it together. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. After Jake told me he'd mentioned us to his sister, I thought maybe things would start moving faster between us, like some kind of confirmation that this wasn't just a fleeting thing. But interestingly enough, it didn't change much on the surface. We still shared the same apartment, had the same routines, and sometimes, yes, he still crawled into my bed at night. But underneath, something was shifting slowly, like a quiet current pulling us closer without either of us fully realizing it. One Saturday afternoon, we were sprawled out on the couch, half watching a basketball game I was only mildly invested in, when Jake suddenly sat up and looked over at me. "Hey," he said, voice a little nervous. "Yeah? I've been thinking about something. I want to take you out, like on an actual date." I blinked at him, caught off guard. "A date?" "Yeah," he said, shrugging but with a faint smile. "Not just roommates hanging out. Like, you and me." My heart did this weird flip-flop. I wasn't sure if I was more excited or scared. "I'd like that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Cool. How about tonight?" We spent the next few hours getting ready in this awkward, sweet way that only happens when you're nervous but excited at the same time. Jake picked a shirt that was definitely not his usual style. Clean, a little too neat for the guy who usually threw on whatever was lying around, and I swear I caught him checking himself out in the mirror more than once. We went to this little Italian place down the street, the kind of place with flickering candles and some indie music softly playing in the background. Sitting across from him, I realized I had never seen Jake like this before. Quiet, a little shy, but also really earnest. We talked about everything and nothing, from his weird obsession with documentary podcasts to the dumbest movies we'd ever seen. At one point, he reached across the table and took my hand. It was maybe the simplest gesture, but it made my chest tighten. I squeezed his fingers back and smiled. "Thanks for doing this," he said. "No, thank you," I replied, because honestly, I felt the same. After dinner, instead of heading straight home, we wandered around the city a bit, just talking and laughing like we'd known each other forever. Eventually, we found ourselves at this quiet park bench, the city lights sparkling around us. Jake looked at me with this strange mix of vulnerability and strength. "I've been trying to figure out who I am for a long time, and with you it feels like maybe I'm starting to get there." I nodded, heart pounding. "Me too. I'm just glad it's with you." We stayed like that for a while, hands intertwined, just soaking in the moment. When we finally got back to the apartment, there was no rush to jump back into the bed or anything. We just sat on the couch, close but not touching, and talked about what this all might mean moving forward. "I don't want to lose what we have," Jake said, a little worried. "You won't," I assured him. "Whatever happens, we'll figure it out. Together." Those words felt like a promise, even if neither of us knew exactly what the future held. The next few weeks were some of the best I've had in a long time. We balanced the messy newness of our relationship with the comfort of being roommates. There were late-night talks, stolen kisses in the kitchen, and the kind of easy laughter that made me realize how much I'd miss just having someone truly close. But as much as things felt right, there were moments when Jake's old walls crept back up. Sometimes he'd get quiet for days, or pull away without explanation. Other times, he'd make jokes about being just confused or messing with my head. Those moments reminded me that he was still figuring this out, and I had to be patient. One Friday night, after a long week, I found him sitting on the balcony again, staring out at the city. "You okay?" I asked, sitting down beside him. He sighed. "I think so. Just scared, I guess. Scared of what people might think. Scared of what this means." I nodded. "I get that, but you don't have to face it alone." He looked at me, eyes shining with something vulnerable. "Thanks, Ben, for being here." I smiled. "Always." That night, as he slipped into bed next to me, I felt this quiet hope growing inside me. Maybe Jake wasn't totally sure who he was yet, but I knew one thing. No matter what, we were in this together. And that was enough for now. The more time I spent with Jake like this, open, honest, and weirdly vulnerable, the more I realized how little I actually knew about the guy I'd been living with for over a year. I mean, sure, we'd swap stories about work and weekend plans, but the stuff that really mattered, his fears, his dreams, the parts he kept hidden underneath all that easy confidence, was a whole other level. One night, A couple weeks after that conversation on the balcony, we were lying in bed, lights off except for the soft glow from the street lamp outside. Jake was unusually quiet, tracing random patterns on my arm with his fingers. Finally, he spoke. "Ben, can I ask you something kind of scary?" "Shoot," I said, bracing myself. "Did you ever think I was pretending? Like, that all this was some kind of joke or experiment?" I thought about it for a second. Honestly? Yeah. The first few times you came into my bed undressed, I thought maybe you were messing with me, or that you were confused and needed to talk. He chuckled softly. "Yeah, I get that. I was confused too." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "But it's real, right? What we've got?" Jake looked me in the eyes, the vulnerability plain as day. "Yeah, it is. I don't have everything figured out, but this feels real." That admission hit me in a way I wasn't ready for. Here was this guy who had always seemed so sure of himself, admitting uncertainty and fear. It made me want to be even more patient, to hold space for him while he navigated this. Over the next few days, we settled into a fragile rhythm of closeness and space. Sometimes we were inseparable, sharing meals, watching movies, and falling asleep tangled up. Other times, Jake would pull away, retreating into himself, and I'd have to remind myself not to take it personally. One Saturday afternoon, Jake came home looking unusually serious. He collapsed on the couch beside me and didn't say a word for a while. Finally, he blurted out, "I told my parents." I choked on my drink. "Wait, what? You told your parents?" He nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. "Yeah, I didn't know how to say it, but I felt like I had to. I couldn't keep hiding." I reached over and put a hand on his knee. "What'd they say?" Jake shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "It was weird at first." They were surprised, obviously. But Mom said she loves me no matter what. Dad's still trying to process it. That felt like a huge milestone. The fact that he was willing to take that step showed me how serious he was about figuring things out, about being true to himself, even if it scared him. That night, after we'd talked for hours about everything and nothing, Jake pulled me close and whispered, "Thanks for being patient with me." I kissed his forehead. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. As things grew more serious, the old roommate boundaries blurred completely. We started sharing more of our lives, introducing each other to friends, cooking together more often, even planning little weekend trips. It was exciting and terrifying all at once. One evening, we found ourselves sitting on the rooftop of our apartment building, city lights stretching out around us. Jake was unusually quiet, staring up at the stars. "You know," he said finally, "I never thought I'd be the guy in a story like this. But here I am." I smiled. "Me neither. But I'm glad you're here." He leaned his head on my shoulder, and for the first time, I felt completely at peace. "I'm scared about the future," he admitted. "But with you, I feel like maybe it's okay." "Whatever happens," I said, "we face it together." And in that moment, as the city hummed beneath us, I knew this was only the beginning of something real, something we'd write together, day by day. In the weeks that followed that rooftop moment, a quiet shift settled between Jake and me. It wasn't like some big, loud announcement or a sweeping change. It felt more like a slow unfolding, like a book you don't want to rush through because every page matters. We were still figuring things out, but the space between us was filled with trust instead of uncertainty. One night, I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when Jake shuffled in, barefoot and in his usual hoodie, and climbed under the covers beside me. I turned toward him, expecting the familiar quiet, but tonight, he was different, more open, less hesitant. "Ben," he started, voice low. "I've been thinking about something." "Yeah?" I said, my heart speeding up a bit. He hesitated, then met my eyes. "I want us to meet some of your friends. Like, not just the, hey, this is my roommate kind of meeting. I want to be part of your life." I grinned, feeling that mix of excitement and nervousness. Introducing him as more than a roommate was a big step. "I'd like that. When were you thinking?" "Maybe next weekend." "If that's okay." "Perfect." That weekend came faster than I expected. Jake was surprisingly chill about it, but I caught the subtle signs. the way he smoothed his hair a little more, the way he double-checked his outfit in the mirror. We headed to a small bar where a few of my close friends were meeting up. The moment Jake walked in, I could see the usual confident guy the first knew. But there was also something softer, more vulnerable beneath the surface. My friends greeted him warmly, and for a while, everything felt easy. We joked, shared drinks, and I watched Jake loosen up in that way that told me this was good for him. At one point, one of my friends raised a toast to Ben and Jake that caught us both off guard. Jake's smile was genuine, and I caught his hand under the table. Walking home later, Jake looked tired but happy. "Thanks for tonight," he said. "I was nervous, but it felt right." "Me too," I said. "You fit in perfectly." He squeezed my hand and looked over at me. "You make me want to be better, to be braver." That hit me harder than I expected. Jake, the guy who'd always acted so sure and tough, was letting me see his heart. And I wanted to protect it, even if I was scared of what the future might hold. But life, as it does, threw us a curveball soon after. A couple days after that night out, Jake got a call from work. His company was going through layoffs, and he might be on the chopping block. The fear and uncertainty in his voice was something I hadn't heard before. Suddenly, the guy who'd been slowly finding himself was facing a scary unknown. We spent hours talking that night, trying to figure out next steps. The conversation wasn't easy. Jake's frustration, the anxiety about money and what losing his job would mean. But there was also this fierce determination in him, the kind of grit that made me believe he'd get through it. I told him, "Whatever happens, you've got me. We'll figure this out together." He nodded, eyes shining with gratitude. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Over the next few weeks, I saw a different side of Jake emerge. He applied to jobs, networked, and pushed through the frustration. And through it all, we leaned on each other more than ever. Nights spent talking on the couch, planning budgets, dreaming about the future, even if it felt uncertain. One evening, after a particularly rough day, Jake looked at me and said, "I'm scared, Ben. Not just about the job, but everything else. Us. What this means." I reached out and took his hand. "I'm scared too, but we're in this together, remember?" He smiled. The kind of smile that makes you forget everything else for a moment. "Yeah, together." A few weeks later, Jake got a job offer with a new company. It wasn't his dream job, but it was steady and promising. When he told me, the relief on his face was palpable. He pulled me into a tight hug, and I realized how much we'd both grown. From two roommates just sharing space to a team facing life's ups and downs together. The next few months were a mix of adjustments and celebrations. Jake's new job came with longer hours, but he still made time for us. Date nights, lazy Sundays, and those quiet moments in bed where everything else slipped away. One night, as we lay tangled beneath the blankets, Jake whispered, "Ben, I think I'm finally starting to know who I am. And I'm okay with it, because I have you." I kissed his forehead, heart full. "I'm okay with it too, with us." And for the first time, the future didn't feel scary. It felt like something we could face together. One day, one moment at a time. Months had passed since Jake started his new job, and somehow, life had settled into a rhythm that felt right. We weren't pretending anymore. No more unspoken questions or whispered doubts in the middle of the night. What we had was messy and imperfect, sure, but it was ours, built on honesty and quiet courage. One Sunday afternoon, we found ourselves sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by takeout containers and the rumble of a lazy playlist in the background. Jake nudged me playfully with his shoulder, that familiar spark in his eyes. "Remember when I first started sleeping undressed? And then that night, I crawled into your bed?" he said, shaking his head with a grin. I laughed. "Yeah, I thought you were either crazy or making the world's worst move." He chuckled, then grew serious. "It took me a long time to get here. To be okay with who I am, whatever that looks like." I reached out, taking his hand in mine. "You didn't have to figure it all out overnight. We figured it out together." He looked at me then, really looked, like he was seeing the whole story, the good and the bad, the awkward moments and the breakthroughs. "I'm grateful for that. For you." In the quiet that followed, I realized I was grateful too. Not just for Jake, but for the journey, the unexpected twists, the fears we faced, and the way we kept choosing each other. Later that evening, as we settled into bed, Jake pulled me close, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on my arm. There was a calmness between us now, a peace that only comes when you stop fighting and start accepting. "Then," he whispered, "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you in it." I smiled against his skin, my heart full. "Me too, Jake. Whatever comes next, we face it together." And in that moment, under the soft glow of the city lights filtering through the window, I finally understood that love isn't always about fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it's found in the quiet, steady moments, the shared fears, the late-night talks, the hands that reach out when you need them most. We might not have all the answers yet, but we had each other. And for me, that was everything.